tributes, of course, are continuing to pour in for Queen Elizabeth II. Now, here in South Africa, after his release from prison, the former president, Nelson Mandela, formed a close relationship with Britain's late Queen Elizabeth II. Madiba met the Queen in South Africa and in England on a number of occasions. Well, we continue our coverage of the Queen's death. I'm joined now in studio by the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Sello Hatang, who issued a statement earlier on today on behalf of the foundation on the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. Your statement says you are very saddened by her passing. Good afternoon and welcome to today, Ntate Hatang. The sadness, why the sadness?
Good afternoon, Ntate Moyana. I think the sadness comes from a place of knowing the kind of relationship that we enjoyed with the Queen. She was a friend of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. The incoming king himself, King Charles III, we've hosted him at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. So we kind of understand the pain that the family must be going through at the moment. And we're saying on behalf of the board of the foundation and its staff, we pass our deepest condolences to them and the people of Britain on this loss. we were reflecting on some of the things that how the relationship blossomed over the years. And you'll note in the statement, there's an anecdote of Ahmed Kathrada coming in, and he found Madiba on the phone, and he could hear Madiba saying, Elizabeth this, Elizabeth that. And he said, I was hoping that it's not Queen Elizabeth. and when Madiba dropped the phone, he asked him, who was that? He said, Queen Elizabeth. He said, shouldn't you have said Your Majesty or Queen Elizabeth?
Not
said,
Madiba.
Well, if she can call me Nelson, then it means I can also call her Elizabeth.
We all remember the story, this story about him being on first name terms. But the relations were very cordial and productive between the two, especially with Britain having been a colonial power in South Africa. After democracy, some people would have expected maybe differently. But Nelson Mandela took a different route in how he embraced the Queen.
You know, one of the things we note is Madiba, by his own admission, he says he was an Anglophile. Deeply he believed in the ruling elite of the English ruling elite. And I think maybe it's also born out of his own roots at home here in the Eastern Cape, that he was part of royalty. And if we are to then do that, it means that whenever we measure his relations with the Queen, we must also remind ourselves of the kind of relationship they enjoyed because of his own past. I was reflecting, Ntate Moyana, about how in most instances we get trapped by the past, where we're hoping for a different past. We are hoping and arguing for a different past, with the hope that the more we argue, it might turn out to be different.
But we can't change the past.
We can't change it. And using the lens of the presence to judge that past doesn't help either.
Yeah, you also go into your statement, you reflect on the visit of Queen Elizabeth to South Africa. I think it was 1995?
95, yeah. So during that visit, Madiba then conferred the name Motlalepula.
Motlalepula, what?
Motlalepula, because it rained heavily in South Africa with her coming. And you'd know, they'd say, Utlistepula.
Yeah.
You brought a lot of rain.
As the Queen was coming to South Africa, it was raining heavily. It was raining heavily.
And he said, Madiba then hosting Prince Charles, then Prince Charles, he said, with El Nino coming, we hope that Motlalepula will bring Pula again. Because I think you can confer such a name in a local language when you know that the relationship is really deep.
Yeah, the relationship is very good. I was one of the few media people who were invited to the dinner with Queen Elizabeth when she was here in 1995.
95.
Yeah, because some of us were not convinced that we should have royalty, you know, and stuff. And we made comments. I spoke on Radio 702 at the time. My colleague and I at the time, John Robbie, we sort of spoke about it, and I guess I got into a little bit of an attention, and I was invited. I mean, who am I to go and have a dinner with Queen Elizabeth? That was in 1995. But when you look at the legacy of Madiba, which just the other day you and I were talking about on the 23rd anniversary of your foundation, and you look at the legacy of Queen Elizabeth in terms of how she carried herself. I've been talking to various people, and people say she was exemplary, and people said that she carried herself with dignity. And what else?
You know, one of the beauties of people who serve for this long is it can come with a sense of entitlement to things, and you forget that you are there at the service of the people. And I was listening to the British High Commissioner just now before arriving here on radio, and he said if there's one thing that he remembers so clearly of the Queen is how she served with everything she had. Her selflessness reflected in her sense of service. You and I reflected on one moment of Madiba in prison when one of his comrades was ill. And Ndade Ahmed Kathrada tells a story of how Madiba would every morning go to his cell, take the bucket where the comrade relieved himself and go and clean it, bring it back. And in the afternoon, after they've served on the ground, do the same, go and clean. And I think this is a generation of servants. And if we are to do anything about their past, is to ask ourselves, how much am I doing to show that I serve beyond the title?
In fact, in one of her speeches in 1953, as these reports now, we are looking back at her life coming up, she used those words that she wanted to be of service to the people and the Commonwealth. I mean, South Africa is a member of the Commonwealth. How important was the Commonwealth to Madiba?
Very important. And I think I was asked earlier on, what do I think should happen to the Commonwealth? Institutions are there to outlive their founders. And if an institution has always been there to help with fair trade, to help with sport, to help unite nations beyond borders, we must encourage those, because at the moment the world is so fractured that it reflects on issues of migration and even frowns upon immigrants. And it saddens me, Ndate Moyane, that today the government of Britain is doing what it's doing with refugees, where they are sending them, shipping them off to Rwanda. I'm hoping that they will begin to reflect on this legacy and ask themselves, is that what the Commonwealth is about? The Commonwealth is about solidarity, ensuring that you receive those who come through, like Madiba did in 1962, actually, when he went over to the UK asking for support for the ANC. And that's the kind of thing that I think the Queen would have been advocating.
Yeah, especially because she's been credited by the Commonwealth. I read their statement, the Commonwealth, a few hours ago. They are crediting her with supporting the modernization and expansion of the Commonwealth to include countries that were never colonized by Britain, like Mozambique, like Rwanda on our continent.
And I think it shows you that she was a visionary who thought it important to have a global community that's inclusive, because most people just want to belong. And if you make them belong to an institution like that, it means that you're saying we are all one in terms of making sure that
we know that she had no political power. She didn't get involved in politics, Queen Elizabeth II. We know she had no political authority, that she just has this symbolic, ceremonial, largely ceremonial role as the monarch of the UK. But she had some influence. She had some influence maybe behind the scenes. She could influence things. Some people believe she could have done more, particularly in acknowledging the atrocities committed under British colonial rule. What are your thoughts?
You know, one of the things that I heard today being mentioned was how the Queen should have apologized for the past. And I think the bit that opens the window to the kind of the Queen that we then got to understand and appreciate is reflected on the relationship she enjoyed with Madiba. And if we are to do anything, in some instances, it's deep and important to do the apology, but it's also very important to then help relations be built upon a society that has values. And our nation should be trying that as much as possible to try build a values-based nation and values-based society that cares about the poor.
Yeah, you conclude your statement by saying that you are wishing Prince Charles strength, but now he's king, as we know, because automatically in their system there, he's now ascended to the throne, King Charles III. You're wishing him strength and fortitude as he takes on the new responsibility at this difficult time. What would you, as Nelson Mandela Foundation, hope the British royal family going forward, and because of the support that you've always enjoyed from them, what would you hope them to continue doing?
You know, one of the things that I hope that the British monarchy will try to do is to deal with woundedness that came with colonialism. I read some of the stuff that came out of India, for example. Here, Black Twitter yesterday, last night, was flaming about how the woundedness and the damage caused, stuff that Britain has that it shouldn't be having, that belongs to nations like ours, that where they colonized and took stuff out. If anything, I would urge him to do that, do right by those countries, one. The second thing is to continue to influence through the Commonwealth fair trade and issues of ensuring that we use sport in order to unite people. Thirdly is to try influence government policies. Even though he's symbolic, but he has influence, as you said. And that influence should be used on issues of refugees and policies that can then ensure that we have a more cohesive world and that we are more cohesive than we are at the moment.
Thank you very much for your time again in studio here on Today on eNCA. That's Ntate Sello Hatang, the Chief Executive Officer of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, who've joined the rest of the world in paying tribute to Queen Elizabeth II, who died yesterday. Now,